Good. Hi, everyone. And thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Mindful Constitution podcast. Today, I am chatting with Michelle Baker. Michelle is owner of Dynamic Balance, where she specializes in neurofeedback. She's also getting her master's at Harvard right now in psychology. She's very passionate about the area of stress and the impact that has on our lives. And she also has a nonprofit called The Benefit of Balance. Is that right? Benefit of Balance.
Right.
Hello, Michelle.
Hi, Katie. How are
How's it going?
you?
I'm great. I can't wait
Good.
to dig in with you. I
Thank you. I'm
actually
excited.
yeah, and for every backstory, I met Michelle at a Women in Wellness networking event, and I heard her speaking about stress and her holistic approach and neurofeedback. And I was like, oh, she'd be really good on the podcast. And then we started chatting, and she also shared that she went on her own kind of sober curious little path. And so I was like, well, that's just the cherry on top. So we can talk about all of that. And I'm very excited. And so, first, though, I wanted to share or ask if you could share a little bit more about dynamic balance and what led you down this path and how you kind of came to specialize in this area.
I have always been really connected to people, and I've always been able to just observe how things affect them from as an outsider's perspective, even as a young person. And I started my career back in 1996, my business back in 1996, by doing exercise and exercise therapy and working with the body. And as I worked with individuals, you get a lot of one-on-one time with people, and you start to get to know them and you listen to their story. And I started to understand how their stories, even their experiences, manifested in their physical body, and how some of their discomfort or some of their pain and injury had a connection and a source to the stress that they were living, or the experiences or the trauma that they had dealt with. So I have evolved over, this is now 30 years, almost 30 years in private practice, where I just understand the body as a communicator for what's going on in the entire system. And that can either be emotionally or mentally or physically, but generally everything is becoming, a psychological when it goes into the mind. So, how that manifests through the body is a great way to understand what's going on with a person. You can even sometimes tell just by their physical presentation that they're carrying some kind of discomfort emotionally. Sometimes you might walk by a person who's really hunched over, and sure, there's many layers as to why they're hunched over, but there's very likely some heart-centered challenge that they've lived with that has created that development of that body. So, and that body posture. The neurofeedback was implemented about 8 years ago. I incorporated it because, yes, I was working with so much that was happening physically, but it is coming from how the brain has developed coping strategies. So that became another thing with the physical body. I'm also a polarity therapist, so I work heavily in energetic responses to things. And then now this brain based connection just made it a little bit of a trifecta for me to
Yeah.
connect all those parts.
Yeah. And so the mind body connection is a big focus. Do you like Joe Dispenza?
I've heard and read not a ton, but I do know of him. I mean, there are a lot of great minds out there that have a different perspective. And I think that's so important because certain individuals are going to align with the delivery of a certain type of provider. And I think that it's great that we have so many people who incorporate the knowledge that they have, especially evidence-based knowledge around this type of thing, because the the gap that happens between conventional medicine and the holistic side is that often there's a lot of things that are a little bit considered more pseudoscience than fact based. So he is a very intelligent and incredibly compassionate person in his delivery to the people that need to hear from him,
Yeah.
because his audience is very attracted to his delivery part of it. So
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's what makes him really popular in the area is that conventional medical background combined with personal
right,
experience and the integration of like evidence-based and science. Because, like you said, a lot of people look at, even when you just bring up, the mind-body connection and your thoughts impact your physical state and the importance of meditation and stress management and building stress resiliency. It sounds kind of woo-woo in some ways, and a lot of people need that, like, where's the proof, sort of.
right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I was a little bit more woo woo before I started my education at Harvard. and, and then I really learned a lot about just the importance of having evidence-based practices. And there is plenty out there about the energy of a human being or the mind body connection. There is plenty of science out there about that.
Yeah.
It is just not mainstream because our entrainment to what we hear is more about treating an illness rather than healing the person. And
Hmm.
that's very different because treating an illness requires interventions, generally pharmaceutical interventions. And those are, those studies are well published and more accessible because there is a lot of money behind it. Even neurofeedback is evidence based, but because of the lack of funding that goes behind presenting it to the public in a greater way, it still seems, you know, strange and kind of woo woo, as you said, but it's not because there's data behind it. But so, I'm in the process of trying to understand how to bridge that gap.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's really great. I did my master's in functional medicine and nutrition as like it was human nutrition from a functional medicine lens. So really looking at how do we use dietary interventions for specific um chronic illnesses, etc. And it is interesting though, yeah, there is this like sense of certain things being woo-woo, but it's funny because the things that are like considered woo-woo generally like intuitively make a whole lot of sense. And then just, you gotta eat. So I feel like for a lot of us, it's like, well, it seems obvious, but sometimes people need that added layer of
Right,
here to study. But I love what you said, there's issues of funding and the who's going to put money into the studies. And usually people aren't going to put a whole lot of money into studies that aren't gonna provide any return. So you want to prove that whatever interventions you can sell are getting
right,
the
right.
focus on that.
And the thing about neurofeedback, I would say, just putting together all of why it's not so much more mainstream, and this is more assumptive, but because every person has a subjective experience, there is no start and end to what it is that they're dealing with because all of the variables in their life make them completely different from every other person. So you can't take a sample study and be like, okay, this is certainly there is science that shows that it's effective for ADHD and anxiety and sleep challenges. But when you go into the broader sense, every person is made up of so many different experiences and variables, and how they perceive stress, how they deal with stress, and then how they are resilient to stress is completely different. So that I think is important with a lot of even medically based interventions because, but data can be wiggled to, prove X, Y, and Z depending on how it needs to be represented. And I know I try very hard not to talk like that because I think that's, you know, um, I don't want it to be that we don't have resources that are reliable because we absolutely do. I just think the human being at this point in time needs to understand that there's variations to different interventions and it can't be that it either works or it doesn't.
Yeah.
It's we need more flexibility around what else can we do to make it work better.
Yeah, and I just think too, what I think of with what you're saying is like there's a level of discernment needed when we're looking at research and different interventions and understanding that some that are like pushed to the forefront might not be the only option. It's just the most research depending on monetary interests and contributions and all of these things. And I think that's really important. It's just the truth of the matter. And I think that it's empowering to, it can be a little bit like, oh, going down the path of like, oh, we have like everything is poison. We can't believe anything like that route. But it's like, well, that is not the case, but it doesn't mean that
Right.
can't just go in blindly, like accepting whatever suggested intervention is given to us and just, you know, keeping a watchful eye on the information we're consuming around our health and wellness.
Yes, because there's a lot of consumption of information. And, especially with all of these social media platforms we have, it's very important to know and to trust what you're reading.
Yeah.
And to believe and to know that this is coming from a reliable source. This is another problem with research. Sometimes, not necessarily research, but actually how who's presenting information, where is their source of information coming from.
Hmm.
So, but
Yeah.
that's, yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's taking advocacy for your health requires like discernment,
Right.
individualization, which I think is like a big piece too, and that there's not one size fits all. And it's like a big responsibility to truly take accountability for our health and not just kind of like absorb whatever information's out there. Like we have to play a really active role. And I think sometimes in our healthcare system can be structured in a little bit of like an authoritative, like I'm the doctor, I'm the physician, and I'm in charge, and I'll tell you what to do, sort of thing. And that's definitely shifting, and it's of course like a very big generalization, but I think it's kind of made, and I definitely have done this too before, where I've gone and like they told me to do this, and like that must be what I should do. And did it, and then now realizing, oh, there was many more options available to me at that time, and getting people to realize that is a process that I think is currently shifting a lot. And I want you to really explain what neurofeedback is, because people might be have heard of it, but I don't know how familiar I even really was with it before meeting you. So will you
Okay.
share what it is, how it can be helpful? I would love to
Let
know.
Yes, let me give you a little prologue to
Okay.
our brain and our nervous system, right? We all want to be at a level of equilibrium, right? At a nice level playing field where everything feels right. As we go through life, we have different experiences, sometimes traumatic ones, sometimes, getting yelled at. Those can trigger a person to have a response that feels uncomfortable. And if that happens repetitively over time, our brain will develop these brain based frequency behaviors to cope with these different challenges. And then what happens, and it's a stress response, okay? And if you are in that stress response, generally we're allowed and our systems will bring us back down to that level of equilibrium. But if we're always in that level of stress without that rest, we develop this new coping strategy and our brain frequencies adapt to that high level of stress. So with the neurofeedback, it's a biofeedback based exercise where we're teaching that those brain frequencies to come back down to that equilibrium so that they know how to face stress. And we need those frequencies to be activated in the face of stress, but we also need them to come back down to that level of equilibrium so that we can stay healthy. Because otherwise, all of these other symptoms start to develop over time. If we're always high up here with that level of stress, then that's when illness and disease start to present itself,
Right.
whether it be physical or mental. So the neurofeedback it's a biofeedback based tool to teach the brain waves how to shift down from that elevated state.
So it essentially provides, like in black and white, like this is you in fight or flight, you're in sympathetic nervous
Yes.
system, and like this is you in parasympathetic rest and digest, and kind of giving you that illustration of like, this is what this feels like. This is what this feels like. You want to
Right.
feel like this to be in
Yes.
this good space.
Yeah. And it's really interesting. Everybody's response to it, it's a long-term process. It's similar to a physical therapy form of commitment because you are trying to teach your brain to do a new behavior. And I do a 30 session minimum with the practice and also with the nonprofit where because that's where the science, right, that's where the evidence shows that these changes are more they hit a sticking point so that the changes are more permanent in this person. And these
Mhm.
behavioral changes along with what the brain is doing, where I am a mentor around the stress response and behavior change. That's part of what I do when I work with people, because again, they're coming to me, they might be coming to me because they have anxiety, but what is causing that anxiety is my big question. So we're trying to figure out where that's coming from. So while the brain is learning that new ability to face stress with more resiliency, we're also talking about what the stressors are so that they can know, because oftentimes these stressors are completely subconscious. They don't even know why they're stressed, but you can't fix the stress unless you know what's causing it. And to be quite frank, that's what medicine is. You can't heal something unless you know where it's coming from. So the same thing goes with how they respond to stress. And the physiology of the body has all different responses: an elevated heart rate, you might get sweaty, you might have digestive problems, but that is your physical body responding to stress. So,
Mhm.
what we want to do is teach the brain how to be able to use those resources when it has to, and then come back down to equilibrium when the needs
Yeah.
are done.
It's like the HRV of the brain.
It is the HRV of the brain because HRV is heart rate variability for those watching, is biofeedback. It's a form of biofeedback, and it is a form to teach you how to understand when your heart is off kilter, and it's you can breathe to bring it back to its regular heart rate so that you can then control how your body responds to that stress. And this is biofeedback for the brain.
Yeah, it's just that awareness too is so huge because I think so many people are operating in states of fight or flight just chronically and they don't even realize it. So I love how neurofeedback and HRV and these kind of like biofeedback tools allow people to see, even taking a stress test, I think is great for a lot of people to be like, oh, wow. Because sometimes we stress is this amorphous, vague, like, I'm stressed out, but being able to show, like, this is how it's deteriorating your health, like this
Right.
heart rate, these brain waves. These are the things that you want it to look like this, and this is how you would feel for it to look like that, and really connecting the pieces because otherwise, it does really give people that, like we said, evidence-based, science-backed kind of you're seeing in black and white, which I feel like a lot of people do need just to reinforce,
Totally. Totally.
the
Woo woo is
deterioration.
not a comfort for everybody. Woo
Yeah.
woo is not, the flexibility of holistic medicine or
Mhm.
holistic healing, that can be a little almost not enough reinforcement and not
Well,
enough security around
yeah.
how it's going to work.
I totally get what you mean. I thought of this a lot because I did 4 years of health coaching with just like a corporate health coaching kind of app. And I worked a lot with people around just diet and lifestyle, right? And they did do like a food journal to track what you're eating and like looking at caloric density and kind of like really honing and weighing yourself and stuff like that. And then in other instances, I obviously am in the health and wellness realm and I see a lot about don't weigh yourself every day, mindful eating, intuitive eating. But I think that, this weighing yourself daily or really checking, obviously not like counting your calories to restrict yourself, but just that level of very preliminary education and kind of understanding what you're eating, I think that structure is actually really helpful for some people. Maybe not every demographic, or if you've struggled with like eating disorders or whatnot, is probably not the best, but it is for some people like needing that segue into a more intuitive space. I think it's helpful. Whereas other people might need, they like the flexibility of mindfulness and listening to your body, but I don't think some people can get to that space until they see, like, oh, this is what I'm actually eating. Like, this is what nutritious, like, just the basics of nutritional education and stuff. So I love that because it isn't one size fits all, and people are at different spaces and they kind of need different approaches. Even same thing with sobriety, right? Like, some people really need the rigidity of AA because they've gotten to a state of addiction that like requires that, whereas sober
Right.
curiosity has a lot of fluidity and can leave a little bit more room for people to find their own path. So it's so true in almost every aspect of health that we have to find, what works for us.
I would like to also mention that time of life has a lot to do
Mm.
with when you're ready to incorporate it. Okay,
Mhm.
because I'm 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 knocking on 50's door. That's my next birthday. And this part of my life, I'm in a different headspace than I was 25 years ago when whatever.
Yeah.
When I was 25 and I was like that person. But I am in a different place where knowing how my body actually feels makes gives me more of an insight as to how my health is than other things, you know.
Mhm. Right.
So that just it's like what do we pick up along the way as far as information? We put it in our little file cabinet of details that we resonate with, and then the ones that are necessary at that time of your life will be available to you.
Yeah.
And having that trust around the things that you're incorporating and knowing that you can change. We the whole idea that change is not possible or what have you. I don't know what the mantra is around that, but it is because it's a choice. So you can put whatever choice into the matter that you want. And we have we have this incredible life to live, and I just encourage people to be patient with themselves around change and know that it's okay to change,
Mhm.
that comfort to make everything happen the exact way they think they have to is actually a big stressor.
Yeah.
So yeah, and the
Yeah.
whole point is to just feel a little wiggly around life's choices.
Yeah, my mom always says, wear life like a loose garment. And
Yay.
you just kind of let it like flow and take what works. And what you said about season of life too, especially as it pertains to health, is so important, that flexibility with ourselves, because like what worked a decade ago might not work this
Yep.
decade. And staying curious and kind of like rolling with the punches as we change is like, okay, I don't think I want to do half marathons anymore. I might just
Right.
like some yoga at this point in my life or whatnot. Or like
Totally.
being myself every day doesn't work right now. I feel good with that. I just want to feel this type of way, or all of the things, like really allowing yourself to change and evolve. I love that.
Evolve. We are always evolving, and that's what makes us grow and thrive, is that evolution. So
Mhm.
change is actually the vitamin we need more of,
Mhm.
is the ability to adapt.
Yeah.
It's harder for some people than others. I'm not trying to be, not uncompassionate about it, but it is a great skill if those people that have a hard time with it can just try to like try a little bit of adaptation, little teensy bits. When I'm working with people, that's the key. I don't believe that change through this neurofeedback process should be happening fast, because you have to adapt new behaviors to your life and feel successful about it,
Hmm.
where then you can say, okay, I was successful with this. I can do something that's a little harder, or I can do two changes instead of one, or what have you, because a, adaptation over time is a little bit more long lasting than these huge contrasts that we try to, which is why it can be challenging to feel like, it can be scary to change because people think it's either all or nothing, and it isn't. There are different
Yeah.
gradations.
Definitely. I know I always try to work with people for a minimum of 6 months, because I
Mm-hmm.
say like anything that I'm going to support you through isn't going to happen really quickly. And that way you can navigate through different seasons of life with them. I mean, we are always changing and feeling different from day to day, week to week, season to season. And then there's different things that come up throughout the year, external to ourselves. And so just helping people to move from the mindset of kind of immediate results or gratification to long-term fulfillment, I think is like the real underscore slash like root of really kind of helping them on their own path go where they want to go. Because I feel like our society there's so many easy outs for us to like grab onto, especially in vulnerable states, whether it has to do with weight, health, fixing, personal development. Like there's things kind of pushed on us at all angles. And so to actually choose to kind of take the more challenging route of like, I'm digging in here doing the work, it's not easy. So anyone who does it deserves a big round of applause.
Totally. A big hug.
Yeah.
Totally.
I wanted to ask too, what are, the main issues that you work with people using neurofeedback? I know you mentioned
Funny.
ED.
Well, so sometimes people will be coming to me about one specific thing. And
Mhm.
then as we're starting to regulate their system and regulate their brain, it's changing a lot of different things. So if the nervous system and the brain is not in a state of homeostasis, it's going to affect a lot of different things. Often I work with children that are diagnosed with ADHD and anxiety and autism and OCD, and but these are all also labels of symptoms that are happening because of a brain and a nervous system that is out of equilibrium. Okay, so I don't work on an ADHD profile. I work with
Mhm.
the person to help them regulate their symptoms around focus and attention, for instance, because I think the label also pigeonholes a person into, saying it's because of my ADHD, it's because of my anxiety, but the anxiety and the ADHD are kind of like the pinnacle of all of the symptoms. So we're trying to address all things. And I know that that's a very broad answer to your question, but um, a symptom that a person is living with is generally not just one particular
Yeah.
thing. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Actually, feel free to elaborate here because I know we were talking about a big piece of your work is kind of like taking away the label and the diagnosis from the person. So can you share how, focusing too much on a diagnosis as opposed to like restoring the root cause can be a little bit limiting or maybe even damaging?
Well, I will say this is especially a focal point when I work with children,
Hmm.
because when I work with children, I also work with their parents. And, while the child is getting their neurofeedback, I have 30 minutes to communicate with the parents about different experiences or interactions they might have. And so these interactions, are also a habituated situation between parent and child and vice versa. And so, if a child is acting a certain way, I might say, well, can you give me an example? And so the parent will describe it, an at home interaction. And I might say to the parents, why don't, it might be helpful for that child's response if you maybe address it in this way,
Hmm.
because the parent, it's a we're all reacting and responding to things that make us feel jolted with that stress response. And I find that if we can help parents understand like how these little things are contributing to the stress of the child,
Hmm.
not that I'm blaming parents, I want to make perfectly clear, because we're parents, you have a child, so we're parents and we're stressed all the time too, so we're
Yeah.
like
And you
trying
just
to adapt.
maybe don't have an awareness around like something you're perpetuating and just being able to be like, hey, if you like don't maybe try this instead of that, like that might help to because it's like the dynamic of relationships. Like we even
Yes.
things we don't like within relationships, we can unknowingly perpetuate like the role we play, being a people pleaser, being the control freak. Like we all kind of play roles in those dynamics. And so I could see how that could be the case if like parents are just kind of unknowingly saying things that maybe aren't helping.
I'm a mom, and my son he was born prepackaged. That's what I say, because his ability to communicate with me about what I'm saying and how it affects him, it's like he was made to help me understand human relationships better, because he just has this incredible ability to communicate with me in a very calm way about how what I'm saying or doing or the energy behind it is affecting him. So I've been able to take that information and help, not just what my son has taught me, but all the years of really understanding human beings. Because if a parent, let's say, yells at a child for not cleaning their room, and then the child responds by arguing back, and then the parent, it's just like it could go on and on and on. So, there's also vocabulary around go clean your room, and it would really help if you could go clean your room for me right now, or that dialogue is totally different. And so it's all these little small minute changes that can make huge impacts on feeling different. And I really enjoy working with families in that way, because I'm not therapizing them and I'm not trying to ask them how they feel. I'm giving tips in a very, hopefully it comes off as non-judgmental, but I mean, like, in a very in a partnership, because we're all in this together. And when a child comes to see me, I say to the families, he's he or she is coming to work with me, but it is not okay for him to think that everything that is going on in his life is all because of his or her behavior, because it's not. And so
Yeah.
we have to be able to have that dialogue, because I don't want the child to feel like they're trying everything they can to be better at behaving and they just can't figure it out. That is not a successful outcome. And it is
Yeah.
certainly not building resilience for the child.
Mhm.
So it's all about trying to work as a team.
Yeah, it's an ecosystem, our family.
Totally.
And we all
Totally.
have our little role. It's just, I know that's so, but I always think of that when I get in a fight with my partner. Like, okay, how could I have done this differently?
Right.
What role do I play? He
And
would be,
communication
yeah,
is the most important thing. Even if we mess up, if you acknowledge it, that's like, as humans, we don't like to generally admit when we're wrong, but it really helps the other person if you just acknowledge, one of how I contributed to the problem.
yeah,
And I want, so that I can not only acknowledge and validate the person's feelings, but also work on trying not to have it happen again, because
yeah.
that's
And
how we learn.
yeah. And with parenting is just so much about like, how can I change my approach maybe to get like the best from my child or to foster like their best self and
Right.
shepherd them in a way that is allowing them to be like the best, most vibrant version of themselves. And it's so interesting because I was reading this book recently. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's called Bringing Up Baby. It was like kind of popular when it first came out. I think it came out like 5, 10 years ago. I honestly don't know, but it's just about raising kids in France. An American woman had kids in France, and she talks about the differences. And one of the big kind of cultural differences was like treating your child like a
Like a
human and
human.
not, yeah. And it sounds so basic to say, but just like expecting that they have like meaningful contributions to make and
Totally.
expecting them to say hello when you see someone. They said like the four most important words are thank you, please, and hello and goodbye, because acknowledging an adult's presence when they enter the room also brings the adult or the child into this level like of connection, and like we're expecting you to acknowledge an adult and we are in turn like acknowledging you as a human presence
As a
here,
human. They're
not just
just
like,
small versions of
yeah.
bigger versions of humans.
Yeah, I know. And so I've always kind of taken that approach with my son. Like, I want to talk to him, and answer his questions and engage him and really treat him like the little spirit he is, even when he's not communicating with me or is making grunting noises and pointing. Like,
This is the other thing that I really want to speak about. Children's behavior is communication.
Mhm.
And they don't have, even if they can speak, you know, wonderfully, they still don't have the tools to know that when something bothers them, they're allowed to say something about it, because they're still learning how to do it. So their behavior is oftentimes, or is, a way for them to communicate. So if it's being punished, and oftentimes it is, or there's a consequence to it, it then makes it so that they're not comfortable communicating, which in turn is going to create that sense of fear around expression. And I'm not saying that all behaviors should be just like, oh, everything is okay, because there is, but it's like, figure out where it's coming from, because it is a form of communication. They're out of homeostasis. They are not in a state of equilibrium. And so their nervous system is expressing it. And
Mhm.
so if that's the case, we have to understand a little bit more about that little individual, rather than, make it so that they're in trouble or send them to the principal's office. And I know that's impossible in a school with a classroom full of 25 kids. It's like, it's not possible. But I think that because of all of the stimulation that's coming in at little people at such a pace, and in such a way that their biological evolution is just not prepared for it, it
Mhm.
is unfair for them to always be implicated in these behavioral challenges. And I just think it's something more to look beyond. And it takes time and energy. And our medical community and our therapists, I mean, there's just not enough of them. But these individual people have something that is awry, these little people.
Yeah, and actually that is perfectly segueing to this question I have for you because I mean we see a lot like it seems to me and this is intuitive, but I'm sure there's like science to back this as well, that there's increased brain dysregulation in children, whether it's like focus, attention, learning disabilities, like emotional dysregulation, what was the other one? Attention. So what do you, and what I'm hearing you say is that there's a lot of systemic factors that are kind of contributing to the dysregulation of children and the perpetuation of that, which is not like this is a bad kid and that's the explanation. It's like there are things influencing this child that are
Totally.
resulting in dysregulation. So what do you think those things are, generally speaking, that
I mean, it could be any number of those things all combined for each individual, but I will say that sleep is on the top of the list. These little humans, up to like age 8 or 10, should be getting like 10 hours of sleep a night. They're not.
Mhm.
So, sugar, I mean, sugar is great, but it should be a treat,
Mhm.
and sugar's in everything, juice, cereal, it's like you really have to, but it's a full time job to, make sure that there's discernment around that. The other thing, hands down, and I'm not trying to be just one of those people as a conspiracy theorist, but these phones in these babies' hands is making their world, which should be like this, right? Their world is like this. So no, and when they're hyper focused on this little teensy weensy world, all of their attention, all of their senses go into this little box. And when that box is gone, there's so much happening. They don't know how to deal with it. And it is overwhelming. So when I see a child, a baby no less, with a phone in their hand, I'm thinking to myself, if this is how we're subduing our children at, as soon as they can grab things, then
It's
they're getting addicted to the phone. But this is a behavior. If I cry, I get the phone. If I cry, I get the phone. That's a behavior. This is what's operant conditioning. Okay. This is what neurofeedback is. It's operant conditioning. You reinforce a behavior and it's going to get stronger.
Mhm.
So, sugar, sleep, and overwhelm of devices. Like
Yeah.
even I work at a restaurant in the weekend, and, most of the kids have an iPad in front of them. They're not part of the conversation. They're
Yeah.
not part of, and I mean, don't think that I wasn't ever giving my son an iPad at a dinner date. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's the overwhelm, seeing our whole culture evolve into that habit.
Yeah.
It's almost beyond repair, because then they go to school and they're on a computer. They're not writing,
Right.
they're not turning pages as frequently. I mean, I'm sure they're doing that a little bit, but when I was a kid, there was a whole class just on penmanship. You spent that 45 minutes just writing over and over and over again. We are
Yeah.
not using these kinesthetic connections to our brain anymore.
Yeah.
And so those are seeds to try to nurture in different ways: sleep,
Right.
sugar, and contact with devices. Those are the top three.
Yeah. And I would think too, just like I just went to Italy and it had me like thinking about all the things in our food that's not in the food there.
Totally. Oh my God, that's
Colors,
like a whole thing. Yep.
chemicals. Um, yeah, and the technological thing is wild. And That's the other thing sometimes with social media. I feel like things get so polarized, even like conspiracy theories. It's like such a buzzword these days. Like
Right.
everything is a conspiracy theory, but
Well, because
it's
because
real.
there's like a group of people who are in that pod that think
Yeah.
that this is what the problem with the world, and there's many things going on. And as you said, the chemicals in the food, these are changing our endocrine system. Plastic bottles, the chemicals in that change our endocrine system, which
Yeah.
that's like a whole new podcast. That's like a whole other podcast to talk about. But those things that change the way our hormones respond to different um, changes in our body, all of these things are messing with us.
Right. And I think so many people like hear someone being like a psychopath, like
Right,
a fanatic about like
right,
deodorant or something, which like I use
right,
natural deodorant. I don't use it, but I do think like we allow like the extreme kind of voices of it. I think people are
right,
so oversaturated with things like that that they just like almost give up fully, even with screen times. It's like people are like, oh, like everyone, psycho moms with their limited screen time are like give up completely. And it's like there's
right,
room in the middle. Like it, you
right,
can't like discredit up and coming. And even with the medical, like I'll kind of criticize the medical system, and talk about the shortcomings of it. And sometimes I can feel people who like have like someone they know that's a doctor or whatnot. It's like, oh, well, like I know someone that's a doctor and or whatever. It's like, I'm not, there's
yeah,
great
we're
people
we have
that
an
work.
incredible level of knowledge in the medical industry. We
Yeah.
totally do. We
We
have
have to
things
like
that can
not,
cure things that otherwise couldn't be cured. I mean, there's no doubt that we have to be mindful of both features. We have
yes,
to
like
be
just,
mindful of the humans and in the information, because we have to
right.
figure out how to get the information to the humans.
Yes. And that like systems can offer great and even technology, right, has great benefit. Like I'm sure there's many ways we can allow our kids to use technology that could like help them grow. But it's like this idea of we can't just not challenge the status quo in if we want to grow and evolve the systems that have great benefit but also have great shortcomings. And I think sometimes people take things so personally when there's critiques, whether
Right,
it's on the medical system or how
right,
you're parenting, or it's like critiques doesn't make you a bad person. It just means
right.
like we could work on improving this.
Right. And it comes back down to communication, because
Yeah.
you and I can have very different perspectives on the same thing. And that's okay, because you understand it and absorb it to how it adapts to your life. And I absorb it as into how it adapts to mine. And being able to talk to each other without getting into a fight about something is something we could all have a little exercise class around. Okay,
I
you know,
know.
it's
Like
it's
preach.
we're all, oh, there's a lot of separation happening, and
Yeah.
it is what it is. But all we can do is be mindful of individuals the best we can.
Yeah. And like everyone's fair in their thinking because our beliefs are simply like a reflection of our accumulated life experience,
Right.
exposure, upbringing. Like everyone's is different. And so I think that's a big piece of my own kind of healing journey, I
Yeah,
guess, has been like exploring my own beliefs and subconscious and really realizing like, these many stem from my own personal experiences and everyone stem from different places. There's always moments of still getting triggered in disagreements or whatnot, but like kind of being able to take that step back is just another thing of like exercising the muscle.
that's right. Exercising the muscle.
Yeah. So, okay. I wanted to talk about, speaking of, so we talked about all the things that are kind of contributing to brainwave dysregulation, particularly in kids. And I
I
wanted to,
do work with adults too, though.
yeah,
I
yeah,
do, but I do have a special affection for children, because they're getting the fuzzy end of the lollipop, I think, because
yeah,
they're just it's just expectation on top of expectation for these little people whose toolbox is like there's just two tools in there so far. We have a full toolbox and we're not even using our tools the right way, right?
Yeah.
So we've, anyway, so I do work with adults very often. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I totally know what you mean. And a lot of times, yeah, we're parenting with limited tools or tools we're not actually implementing. And then
Right.
that's reflected in the toolbox that our children have and what they see. And a lot of times we like, and I'm guilty of this too, but like even just what we're modeling to them. And
Right.
like if they see you on your phone all the time, then it's no wonder that they're going to be reaching for
Right.
the
Why
phone.
is it okay that you're on it, but I have to have 30 minutes and that's it? You
Yeah.
know, I mean, we have to be mindful. They're watching everything we do. They hear everything, even if we're whispering it around the corner.
Yeah.
You know, it's they're magical little sponges, these
They
little creatures,
are.
and I love it. I think they're the most important part of our human race right now is our children,
Yeah.
because God, their lives could make or break them. Do you know what I mean? And their experiences can make or break them. They need to have positive experiences, these little humans.
It's it's simultaneously like the coolest and kind of most petrifying thing ever to
Right,
watch your child grow and absorb everything. Because on one hand, you're like, oh my God, you're literally learned something new since yesterday. And on the other hand, you're like, oh my God, you're absorbing everything I'm
right,
doing.
right.
Like, need to do this, stop swearing, look at my phone less, stop arguing in front of you, like all the things, it's like, it's
It's
just so,
finding a balance.
yeah. And watching them like come online, like exiting the astral plane into the world, the
Right.
first year, you can just like see them coming into consciousness. And even with Arthur, my son, he's about to be 17 months. And it's just funny because he can't really talk yet, but I'll say stuff to him and he responds like he knows. Like I'm like, okay, time for tubby time. And he'll like run to the bathroom door and stuff. And it's just so cool to be like, wow, you are understanding what I'm saying, even though you can't communicate with me. And just those like subtle like things, watching him learn to hug. And when I say, give me a
Yay.
kiss, and he's like, yeah, actually, he goes
Right.
like this with his mouth open.
All babies that I've ever experienced a kiss from at that age do the same thing.
It's so cute. I'm like, okay, we still working on the kiss. But yeah, so tell me, I did want to ask just about before I want to be able to talk about your sober curious kind of experience before we have
Right.
to go. But in alignment with, as we kind of wrap up the conversation on neurofeedback, what do you think, like can you share a little bit more about the importance, in your opinion, of treating the whole person and moving towards a root cause approach as opposed to treating symptoms?
I mean, that's how else, it's not something that we have fundamental access to. Not everybody does.
Mm.
Even as a practitioner, I'm only have expertise about these couple of things. So it's important to have resources to refer to. But it does make a big difference. If you're looking at a diagnosis, then you're missing so many other facets of where that came from, right? There's a book and there's a checklist of symptoms. And if you have those symptoms, then you must have this problem. But there are a lot of symptoms that overlap into different diagnoses. So, um, if we're utilizing the more functional approach, even if that means multiple practitioners, then you're getting a broader range of interventions that make sense to you. Because, even with the medication journey, some people respond to medications in a really bad way. And then they have to start that whole process all over again. That can be so daunting, especially for little people. So, having looking at the nutritional profile of a person, understanding their sleep habits, understanding even their emotional habits, these are all parts of functional approaches to helping these people. And I also want to make sure we talk about the benefit of balance for like just a minute
Oh yeah, go
before
ahead.
we go to, because in talking about all of these functional approaches, oftentimes people are addressing their um, practitioners in most cases because it's what insurance can pay for. Okay. And insurance sometimes does not pay for these peripheral complementary services. So even for neurofeedback, it's an out of pocket expense. It is not covered by insurance. There's nothing I could say or do to make that different, except that I started the nonprofit so that anybody who wanted neurofeedback could get it, because I think it is one of those things. If we can regulate the brain and the nervous system of these individuals, most of these symptoms would be gone. And
Yeah.
that's something big to say. I mean, that's anecdotally, I'm saying that, but I have found it to be so helpful in so many ways. I have endorsements from teachers and parents, and because they're seeing these changes. But it's an out of pocket expense. It's very expensive. It's like a 4 to 6 month process. And when I say very expensive, it's about $4,000 for a person to go through that 4 to 6 months of training, right? Which is a lot of money, for most people. And I want this, I want it so that they don't have to pay for it, or so that they can get at least supplemental support, like a scholarship to cover half the cost or something. That's
Ah,
because a bigger part of the mission of the benefit of balance is to make alternative and complementary therapies that are out of pocket accessible to people. Right
right.
now, we're focusing on neurofeedback because that's where my expertise is. But as we grow and we raise the money we need, I want people to be able to come to us if they want some other peripheral service, because they should be able to treat themselves the way they want to without it being controlled by the industry of health care, because
Yeah.
some people feel different, but there is hope, and not nothing I'm seeing on the horizon, because chiropractic never used to be covered by health insurance. Acupuncture is covered by health insurance. So you never know. But right now, it is not covered. And I truly believe that if anybody could have access to this, it would just change their lives. I've seen it change lives. I've seen it change families' lives, not just the kid.
Mhm.
Because when the kid is not equalized, the unit is in disarray. You know what I mean? It
Yeah.
becomes very difficult. So, as a call to action, we are looking for sponsors. We're looking for people who want to fund something like this, because, it costs, like I said, about $4,000 a person to do this training. And we want people to have access to it. So, if anybody's listening and you need to make a donation this year, you can do it for the benefit of balance.
Yeah.
Please.
Knock, knock. Hello. Yes, I love that. I think that nervous system regulation is such a key component it's such a key component to like the work I do as well around people who self-medicate and like really tapping into reconnecting to your body and understanding how your body expresses stress, how it's communicating to you, how it stores stress, how it stays stressed, and how all of those things can lead us to chronic disease, health issues, self-medication. And so I think it's awesome what you're doing
Thank
and
you.
being able to kind of really help educate people on just how your body's communicating and like what being in your optimal state truly feels like. And even in a woo-woo realm, like the life
Right.
you create from a regulated nervous system is way different than the life that you energetically manifest from a dysregulated nervous system.
Totally.
And
Totally.
I've like seen that firsthand. Like it's wild because your thoughts, and it makes sense because your frequency of your brain waves are affecting the frequency that you're energetically giving off. I'm sure the same thing with like heart coherence and the frequency of your heartbeat when you're stressed versus calm, and how that can like contributes to your whole energetic being and the types of relationships that you're in, the opportunities, jobs, like
Yeah.
how you experience your day to day, what you notice, what you don't notice, synchronicity is available to you, like all of these things that we don't realize from even like a spiritual, emotional element too about really stepping into like our most regulated space.
And it's a process. There's ups and downs. It's not like stress isn't going to happen, because it absolutely 100% is. We need to start to learn how to rebound from
Right.
feeling that elevation of stress. And it's possible because our bodies are equipped for that. But the
Yeah.
world around us is giving us different messages. And even watching the news can be a stress responder. You
Why I
know,
don't.
yeah, it's like some people have it on all day, and
Just playing in the background. Yeah.
and I'm not saying that it's not important to know the news, but it is very sensationalized, and these loops, it's the same negative information going on and on and on. And that becomes a habit.
Yeah.
The vibration of that information becomes a habit. And so
Yeah.
we are meant to be learning for sure. And but the fact that our bodies responds to habituation is, we it's a gift and sometimes a curse, right? You know?
Yeah. And I think it's important to note like what you're saying about habituation and getting used to the frequency of like negativity, negative input or sensationalistic input. And don't get me started on my conspiracy theories about the news. I don't think it's a conspiracy theory that the news wants you in fight or flight in this like addictive state. But
Right.
um
Because they're the ones that are putting the medication advertisements on for commercials. Now
yeah,
that's like everybody, we are getting a little rascally right now, because, but I will say it is true and factual that there are only two countries on the entire planet that advertise direct to consumer
pharmaceutical.
pharmaceuticals,
The
which is
US.
America and New Zealand. They're the only two in the entire world.
And America also marketing like food, I thought, to kids and that type of thing was illegal in other countries too. But yeah, I mean, none of this, there's like way worse, like way more out there. This is just
Sure.
fact, people. This
Right.
is fact that like your news is shaped by investors. Investors, there's many sitting on the board from the pharmaceutical industry. So that makes you also wonder what does not make the news, and I'll leave it at
Oh
that.
yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, so the but what I was gonna say too is like one thing I notice is, and I think this is important too, is like sharing with people that a lot of times when you've been used to being in a dysregulated space, like being
Yes.
in a peaceful space can almost
Right.
feel like uncomfortable because you
Uncomfortable.
habituated chaos and you've
It's
gotten used
true.
to it.
It's true, which is why change over a long period of time is very important. It's about finding the new level of comfort for oneself.
Yeah,
It adaptation that lasts takes time. And
yeah,
our culture for healing is, take this and you'll be okay in 2 days. And that's just not real. It's not even real,
yeah.
because whatever you're taking, you another symptom in most cases.
And it's not resolving
And
whatever is
it's
actually
not,
happening.
yeah, it's just so. Anyway, I mean, we could certainly do a whole nother show on that too.
Yeah,
We have
I
loads of
know.
things we can talk
I'm
about.
like, oh, cramming it all in here in the
I
last
know it's
minutes.
fun.
So,
Yeah, I love
okay,
chatting.
before we go though, I do, because we'll say I have 7 minutes.
Yeah.
So I want you to share before we go
Yes.
and before you can share where people can get involved and find you.
Yeah.
You just share like a few minutes about
Sure.
because we kind of touched upon this that like you had eliminated alcohol sort of just happened that way, no
Yeah.
real kind of precursor to this. So tell us
I
how
mean, the
that happened.
precursor was that I was very aware that I was doing it very frequently.
Yeah.
um, so it was like, just something that every day after work I would just have a little bevy, and it's just like and like that subdued feeling.
The
And
numb.
so the numb. So January 1st of two Januaries ago coming up, I decided to take a break. And I was like, I'm just going to see how it feels and blah, 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 blah. And I've taken a break before. I mean, but what happened was, and again, I think it's time of life because I like want to feel a different way because my mindset is in a different place. So took the month went by and I felt really good and I lost like 10 pounds and I was like, geez, this is the best. And then I'm like, I'm just going to keep going. And if I feel like having one, I will. And, I just enjoy. And then I discovered sleep, uninterrupted sleep, which is my new kind of yummy temptation. All I want to do is sleep. I love it.
Me too.
And not waking up in the middle of the night is so awesome. So, and then I started working at a brewery and I was like, you know what? I'm not usually a beer drinker, but if I feel like having a beer, I will. And I've worked there for over a year and a half now. So, and I have not yet tasted their beer. But what happened was, as I went to say, I'm going to have a drink this weekend. I'm just going to have a martini because it's been, plenty of time. And then what I realized, and this is the big cliffhanger here. I didn't want to feel again what alcohol made me feel like when I was drinking it. So, like, it took me getting rid of it to realize how yucky it made me feel. And I didn't want anything like any emotional memories around it or any like feeling like I just want to numb myself. I didn't want to revisit that because I didn't want to re-invite it into my life because
Yeah.
I love my snuggly sleep. I love smelling beer and not tasting it. I like love this whole new of myself and I'm good. I'm like, I don't miss it. Great. I'm not as reactionary in a lot of ways like because there's a lot like after you've had a bevy for like 4 nights in a row there's the guilt complex and then the next day you're like oh my god I like hate myself for doing that and whatever and I wasn't like a abuser of alcohol but it was a habit and I just feel so grateful that I don't wake up and feel like, oh, I wish I just took the night off like I said I was gonna. I don't want to
Yeah.
deal with that anymore. I have other things to focus on, like positive things that
Yeah.
take up better parts of my time than worrying and feeling bad about something.
Yeah, I love that. That's such a good note to end on is like it's not necessarily like an issue, but just feeling your best and recognizing like, I don't really want to give alcohol that permission to like interrupt any of the good things I have going on or the good
It's
way I'm
true.
feeling.
It's true. And it's a depressant. I mean, there's some people who cannot get out of it because and it's hard to have to watch that. My son's father, may he rest, he just recently passed away, but he didn't he struggled with alcoholism and it was, you know, hard to see what he had to carry with him every day around it. It was
Yeah.
hard to watch. And, yes, the behaviors that come out of the habit can be really awful, but there's a human inside of that behavior that is struggling with something that thinks that this is the better version of themselves, and it is not. They don't know how to
Yeah.
reacquaint themselves with that better version of themselves.
Yeah. And like you said, with regards to kids, like there's a lot of systemic input, whether it's like societally and culturally, experiences and programming growing up, peers, community, like there's a lot of input trauma and, just like some of the brainwave dysregulation is a cause of those things. I think addiction is a cause of a lot of the, like, is rooted in a lot of these things too. That's like, I don't think the ideal way the person wants to express themselves is just kind of a dysfunctional method of coping with pain
Right.
in their lives that like becomes habituated. So many
Yeah.
people like habituate drinking and they don't even have a physical dependency. It's almost just like a psychological
Right.
routine and brainwave. But yeah, that's Agree. No, I feel like we need to have a part two of this podcast because
I
there's
would
so
love
many
that.
things we could talk more about. But before we go, will you please share? And I'm sorry about your son's dad, by the way.
Thank
That's
you. He
yeah,
had a hard time on this planet, but
we're
he
giving you
was,
a shout out on the podcast.
Casey, we love
We love you.
you.
I don't know you, but I love you too.
He was a
Um,
good man. Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, shout out to him. I know it's sad that, like, but we said before we hopped on the podcast, I'll just give a little preface. Me and Michelle were talking about how everyone has like a different soul's journey here, and some people don't kind of overcome some of their lessons, and hopefully they can
Right.
carry forward anything they did learn into the next life.
That's right. That's right.
So before we go, share where everyone can find you and support dynamic balance or benefit of balance.
So we can support the benefit of balance on Venmo. That is the handle, the benefit of balance, and benefit about thebenefitofbalance.org is our website. And more information about what I do, even though the site is currently under editable construction, it's still accessible, but it's dynamicbalancema.com. And so information about me, about how we operate the process and neurofeedback itself is accessible on dynamicbalancema.com. But especially donations for the benefitofbalance.org can be done on the website and through Venmo.
Yes, and it's the holiday season of giving.
Yay,
So
let's
there
give.
you go. Donate
Yep.
for the brainwave regulation. All need a little. So yes, I love what you do, and I'm so excited to highlight you on the podcast. And thanks for
Thank
coming
you.
on. And everyone,
Thank you.
thank you for listening. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if this episode resonated with you. And we'll see you next time. Bye.